Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome to our Empower session. My name is Tyler Campbell. I am construction brother number 2. Is that right? And you're construction
number 2.
Brother
Yes.
number 1.
I'm construction brother number 1.
And your name is Eddie.
And I'm Eddie Campbell, and I'm older, and that's probably the only reason why I'm number 1.
And the only reason we're here is because we started a podcast about construction. And QuickBase has been a partner of the show now for a couple months. And so they invited us to join them. Today, we're going to be talking to Rob Coakley from Lithco Contracting. But before we get into any of that stuff, make sure if you've got any questions, go ahead and put those things in the chat. There's going to be a little 15-minute portion at the end of this interview where you can ask questions to Rob. So make sure that you do that. Well, Rob, thanks for joining us this week. Tell us who you are and what you do.
Well, thanks for having me, guys. My name's Rob Coakley. I'm the equipment manager at Lithco Contracting. I've been with them since 2008, so this is year 16 for me. Prior to that, I was in the rental industry since 1996. So been in this part of the world for quite some time now, both sides of it, from the equipment rental side and now on the contractor side.
Dude, I'm so excited to get into this today because, all right, this is a completely different thing. But I run a video company, all right? And the question is always in the back of my mind, should I buy the equipment or should I rent the equipment? And that's a big part of what you're answering for Lithco. And so, I know this is completely different stuff, but I think every business owner wants to know that. When does it make sense to buy versus to rent?
Yeah, we at Lithco, they had a rent-first mentality. Lithco is the second largest concrete construction company in the country. We have 25 offices in 15 different states. And at the time that I joined, we had 7 offices in 6 states. And if you can imagine, a lot of contracting companies of various kinds, whether they be mechanical or concrete or whatever they are fairly geographically bound, right? They're in one town or they're in a small regional geography. But when you have multiple sites across the country, scaling up from equipment ownership, parts facilities, maintenance, becomes a challenge. It's also capital intensive to own the equipment that you would need on the types of jobs that we do, whether that be telehandlers or skid steers or mini excavators. So having a capital constraint along with a scalability issue put them in the mindset of wanting to be more in the rental space than it did the ownership space. Not from necessarily the aspect of thinking that it was a cost saver per se. It was just a method of operating that they needed to be in. But if they were going to be in that space, they wanted to make sure that they were managing it as efficiently as they could. So I got introduced to them, and we started talking about various ways that you could measure things. And the old adage that if you can measure it, you can improve it was very much what we were thinking we were going to get into when we started this journey. And so from that perspective, it became apparent that my background in rental was going to allow me to transition into the contracting space for this particular opportunity because they wanted to be able to manage as well or outmanage the rental companies from the perspective of knowing what you have, where it is, how long you need it, what you're paying, all the things that are important to a contractor that are, quite frankly, difficult to manage, right? You might have a bunch of paper POs at that time or stuff written down in notebooks, whatever. Maybe you were even advanced enough to have it in a spreadsheet, but it becomes a challenge to share that information across your organization, certainly. And it also becomes a challenge to have that information be as accurate as what the rental companies have. They know how much you're paying. They know how long you're going to have it based on what you've told them. And there's a flexible model of pricing in rental. It's not 5 days does not equal a week and 4 weeks does not equal a month kind of an approach. It's a scale based on day, week, and month rental rates. And that's not the easiest thing to do in a spreadsheet. It can be done, and we were doing it when I started, but we figured there had to be a better way. But the me coming on board with Lithco was really about that. It was about the desire to not be outmanaged by the rental companies on the end cost of equipment. My boss at the time asked me if I understood what my role was after I'd been there about 4 months. And I was like, ooh, that's kind of a loaded question. And I use a bunch of words and I speak around a whole bunch of things and I'm just trying to fill space, right? But he very succinctly put that my job was to make the end cost of equipment a competitive advantage, right? Straightforward, one sentence. And so from that perspective, I took the challenge even before that, but from that point on, it was very much about how am I going to make this a competitive advantage for Lithco in a space where, contractors by and large own equipment. And many times when times are tight, it's real easy to lie to yourself and you can just sort of bury cost, not charge jobs, not put it into the budget of the job or the estimate of that job, and you can win jobs at a cheaper price. Well, it's cheaper, but at some point the bill comes due. You have depreciation on that equipment. You have to maintain it. You have to move it around. It isn't free, but you can make it look that way, which you can't do really effectively with rental. So that was a challenge, and there's lots of things we're going to dive into around that. But that's sort of the background of why I'm with Lithco and how I came to be at Lithco.
We were talking about how, even within the family, like there's this mentality of like, if I can put it in the job and buy the tool, I'm going to buy the tool. Like that's where I'm going to start out. And then I know when we talked on our pre-call, it was like, how many times do you see that piece of equipment with like grass growing up in the yard? And you guys you come at that very strategically and very differently. So it's helped you scale.
Sure.
Right. But it is a pushback at the like prevailing thought a little bit. So like get into that a little bit. Like, why do you believe in that?
So the idea, it's really about the scale aspect of it and the visibility and awareness. Because when you're renting something, the clock is ticking, right? So you have to be aware of what your costs are. Where if you own a piece, you could just sit it on the job and it can almost become part of the background of the
fixture.
job.
Yeah.
And you don't necessarily think of it in those terms, but when it's rental and that clock is ticking, when you don't need it, you need to be done with it. It can help keep you on task from a schedule perspective. So the reason that we feel strongly about the rental side of it comes from that scalability. When we've acquired companies, one of the things that I will always tell an owner is they're usually that one town guy, right? And it's very easy to convince yourself that owning equipment is the right answer. And I typically agree with them on a unit for unit basis. It would be better to own than to rent. But when you start scaling up and you're doing multiple projects across multiple parts of not only the country, but even just your town or your state, the next job that you get is going to require a telehandler, right? So how many is too many to own? If you own enough that you never need to rent, you definitely own way too much. But if you ever need to rent anything, I would argue that there's a path forward to only renting. Because if you think about it, we're a subcontractor. We specialize in concrete construction. Why does every GC not do all their concrete construction? Why do they not do their mechanicals? Why do they not do whatever it is? Because that's not their specialty. Well, we think of it the same way from an equipment perspective. The equipment rental companies are specialty contractors, and we are going to sub out that portion of the job. Now, the important thing for us, so coming back to the acquisitions, when we acquire companies and I have that conversation with an owner or a key ops guy, and I mea culpa that I agree with why they own, I alternately ask them, wouldn't it be just as effective if you have a correct estimate that includes the cost of rental, right? So as long as your estimate is correct and it includes the cost of your rental equipment plus profit, right? So you're putting profit on your cost of the job. That included your rental equipment. And the owner's willing to pay that, let them. It's sort of like Moneyball when they're talking about bunting. And the guy's like, don't try and be a hero. If they lay down a bunt, pick it up, throw it to first, say thank you, take the out. Similar kind of thing. Effectively, if you are a company that is happy with your profit margin, you manage your processes and you have correct estimates, what's the problem? You're going to take a lot of risk to try and get that equipment cost lower, but you're taking on a lot of risk because you have to have mechanics, parts rooms. You've got to lay out cash, take cash out of the bank. And I'm not an accountant. I don't play one on TV. I don't do anything. So from that perspective, it's not easy for me to get into the nuts and bolts from an accounting perspective about why ownership is better from a tax perspective or a write-off or a depreciation. I'm not thinking about those things because that's not my job. My job is to make sure that the vision we have is managed the best that it can be, understanding that we have the cost in the correct estimate and that we're making profit on it. And if I can do that on a small portion of the job like equipment, more's the better. That's sort of why we feel strongly about the rental process. And we're going to get into a lot of the details about how we manage that and what's important in those things. But that's a little bit of the background on the why.
So I'm going to talk about Lithco has scaled aggressively. Mm-hmm. And when I think through the problem that is like scaling a company, mm-hmm. period, but then scaling a large company aggressively, spreadsheets and paper might have been good at the beginning, but I would imagine you've got a problem of scale created around the management of all this rental equipment. So that's where kind of QuickBase come in. Sure. You've gone more dashboard based in your approach. So let's sure. talk there.
Yeah, walk us through that whole process. How do you track this?
We started off with spreadsheets. Still use spreadsheets today for a lot of things. Sure. They're great. They're usually faster. You can on the fly, edit whatever you want, put a column in here, a row there, all that is very easy to do, right? Not super shareable. I mean, you can do it, and there's organizations that do it just fine. But when you start to scale to the size that we are, we were. I explained the geography and the size, but just to give you a scale of revenue, and this isn't any secret information. We're in the ENR 600. We're in the top 20. We have been for a couple of years now. So all the information's out there, but we went from a $135 million company when I joined in 2008 to a $1.8 billion company just this past year. So that's significant growth in a fairly fast period of time. And if you then think about that rolled forward another 15 years, it's a $10 billion company. We're going to have to add enough work every year to get there that is the size of the company today. Like that's mind-boggling to think about. Yeah. And when you're thinking about that, you got to think about your processes and your procedures. And then there's the tools that help you manage those processes and procedures. So from the spreadsheet world, I realized there was a couple things. There was an impediment to sharing the information effectively. There was absolutely, and we'll dive down as many rabbit holes as you want to on this, but one of the secret sauces for us, and it's not really secret, a lot of construction companies do this. It's important to know where you're ending up on the job, what your cost will be at complete. And you have to know where you are today. You have to know where you're going and where you are today. And you have to manage the in-between because that at complete is whether you're on or you're off budget, right? And that's going to be a profitable job or a non-profitable job. We're not in the habit of donating our time and energy and doing work for free. So we have to manage that. And in order to manage that, we needed the right tools. And in order to manage a particular portion of that, i.e. equipment, we needed a tool better than a spreadsheet. And so when we got turned on to QuickBase, it was really about, hey, check this thing out. It might be a really good tool to use for a CRM, right? Which it would be. But as I got to investigating, why me? I'm the equipment guy, right? I'm not the IT guy. But at the time, we didn't have an IT department. So it, by default, rolled down to me because I was the resident spreadsheet jockey and solving all the world's problems one spreadsheet at a time. And it was like, well, okay, test this out. Come back and let's see what we can do. And as I got to using the tool, I realized what other problems I could solve with it. And in fact, we don't use it for a CRM at all. We don't even have a CRM because in our organization, that's not the North Star for us to have a CRM approach to managing relationships with customers. That's not how we do it. So instead, I realized that QuickBase was going to allow us the opportunity to take our spreadsheets out of spreadsheet land and put them into the cloud in a way that didn't require anybody to be an IT expert, a coder, a classically trained MIT guy that knows how to code software and do all this stuff. It's a very handy no-code, low-code tool that allows just a common person with enough sense about technology can follow along. Not only do they have sort of pre-built applications that might be able to solve a problem or are the foundations for solving a problem. It's sort of like buying a box of Legos that's designed to be an X-Wing fighter from Star Wars. Well, they're giving you that. You can use the bits and pieces to make the X-Wing look different if you want. But really, they've got that. But they've also got just a big box of Legos they'll sell you too. And that's really what QuickBase can be. I always use the analogy that it's like the difference between something, a software that's built, purpose-built, and we know them by name, but I'm not going to name them all on here. But you can buy the best of breed software to solve a thing. We'll use an ERP system. You can buy a software that's already canned up, ready to go, and is an ERP system. And with that, you have limited flexibility, right? It's sort of like they built the sandcastle, and all they'll do is they'll give you a stick and say, well, you can draw a few windows in. But the sandcastle is what the sandcastle is. Where QuickBase comes in with a truck and dumps the pile of sand in front of you and says, build whatever sandcastle you want. Or it can be that. And so when I realized that was the case, I decided to start attacking things that needed collaboration. Equipment is, obviously I came from the equipment side. So for me, first and foremost, now why equipment versus some other thing? And you guys having your experiences, I don't know, you chime in here and tell me if I'm off base on this. On almost any job, no matter what kind of contractor you are, the two largest portions of your cost are labor and material, okay? Equipment is usually third. It's a distant third, but it's third. It adds up to a lot of money, and certainly as you scale the way we've scaled, it becomes a lot of money. And so me being in that space, I wasn't going to attack labor and material because we have other tools that help us do that. But equipment was sort of left off in no man's land with spreadsheets. And it's very collaborative. And what about it is collaborative is that in order for you to know that question of where I'll be at the end with equipment, you have to be very cognizant of what the end date will be. When will I be done with this piece of equipment? Because when I'm done with that piece of equipment, then changes the amount that I'll pay, right? If I'm going to keep something for 2 weeks and a day, that's one set of rate value versus if I'm going to keep it for a whole month. And the key is to understand that usually at that 2 weeks and a day point, it tips over to be the monthly rate anyway. So you really have it for free for the next week and a half. But you have to understand where you'll be. So there's a collaboration. So we needed a tool that was going to allow us to collaborate on that. So from that perspective, QuickBase became, and I'll get more into this, but I want to throw this back to you and see where your head's at. That became the reason QuickBase allowed us to do that because it's easily shareable across your entire organization. One, it's in the cloud. You don't need any added hardware. Any browser can work as long as you have access to it. And you don't run into conflict issues. You can both have a record open at the same time and whoever saves it first. Now, there can be issues with that, right? As an organization, you have to know stay in your lane, right? Not everybody can be working on the same thing all at one time. That's not a very effective way to do anything because one guy should be the owner of that, right? And he's the one telling the system or whatever your tool is, this is the end date for that rental. When I hit save, anyone else can see it in a moment's notice. It's live for everybody through dashboards, through reporting, through automatic notifications that can be set up to be sent. So if I'm an operations manager on a job site and someone in the office, my project superintendent, or we call them project coordinators, they're sort of the checkbook keeper of a job. They're managing all the takeoff and the buyout and all the things that are important to the cost of a job. And the ops guys are out running the job. When I'm done with something, we can have it set up that notifications can be sent. So that's why the collaboration of a thing like QuickBase becomes so important.
You guys have taken QuickBase and kind of made it your own, right? You've taken the sand that they've given you and you've made your own sandcastle out of it. So like, what kind of things have you developed within the tool that have really started helping you, saying things maybe like short-term planning and things like that? So
for us, it probably falls in the vein of short-term planning, but really our whole secret is we're always short-term planning. Right. So our whole approach is to know that whole, where are you going? Right. So from a QuickBase perspective, the things that we've developed and utilized that we find invaluable are having really good, well thought out reports and dashboard items. There's might be a misconception about what a dashboard is or how you would use it from a QuickBase tool perspective. Whenever you can run any kind of report, you can build any kind of report that really you can think of. And you have to be very diligent about the fact that report solves a very particular question in your organization, whatever that question is for you. Because again, it's not just information for information's sake. You just don't want to throw up thousands of records and expect a person to know how to suss out what it is they need. So we started off very much just utilizing reports for that. And then QuickBase developed within the last number of years the ability for you to create dashboards. They always had a homepage that had a landing spot for different reports, but they've created dashboards that allow you to the difference. And for the Empower folks, they are already going to know this, but a homepage is more app oriented. The information has to be in that app. So if you guys haven't really used it a ton, the information has to exist within that application for you to use it on a homepage. But when they introduced something called dashboards, and we called those dashboards before because that's just the word we used. But when they actually came out with dashboards, they made the ability for you to pull in information and reports from other applications. And when I say applications, I mean applications within QuickBase, not your other systems. You can get it into QuickBase, and that's a whole other thing. But if you're tracking information about jobs, as I mentioned, people, as I mentioned, and equipment, as I mentioned, if you wanted a dashboard that allowed you to see something from each of those, it really didn't exist very well in QuickBase before. So within the last number of years, they have opened up dashboards, and that has allowed you to pull in that information into a singular space. And from that, you're now able to have a very good, clean look at information that is specific to whatever problem it is you're solving. For us, in this example, it could be the equipment side of it. That team that I mentioned that does their equipment coordination for the whole country, we have a dashboard that allows them to easily operate on the things that they need to focus on. Think about you've got a logbook or a spreadsheet, and you have something that's left open, right? You didn't close it out. It's not done yet, right? Well, if you're in QuickBase, same thing. But how do you see and get back to those open items quickly? And how do you then have management be able to supervise that, right? Because for us, one of our big marching orders or our mantras is LMS. It's leadership, management, and supervision. So if we're going to lead, there's a particular thing you're trying to solve, and we're going to attack that problem. That's leadership. That's looking around multiple corners, right? A lot of people are good at looking straight ahead at what's coming at them. But the leaders have to look around corners. What's the next thing, right? So from a leadership perspective, what are you trying to solve for? The management is, what processes and procedures are you going to bring to bear on that topic, right? And then the supervision is, you then have to track how you're doing with those processes and procedures to solve that problem. So in this example, my leadership approach was, I need to be able to have a window into the quality of work we're providing. So how do we do that? we use QuickBase to create dashboards that allows us to package all of the open items for various things, because maybe it's today, one aspect of it is I've got POs that have been written and brought into QuickBase that don't match my records for that job. And so I got to track down where is that problem, who is it with, and how do we solve that? Conversely, I mentioned our process for partnering with vendors on a job. Well, QuickBase allows us to, by knowing that we have, that's the other thing that we didn't get into, but I will here from a QuickBase perspective, we are able to open up the content of QuickBase to our outside third parties. So from our vendor perspective, we are able to share with them access to QuickBase in a very narrow way that allows them to participate in the process of us selecting a vendor. And that's through a bid process. We submit all of our jobs out for bid. We had to bid on jobs to win them. And we then require our vendors to bid on them to be our first call vendor, right? So we're able to do that in QuickBase, in a system like QuickBase. And they are then able to give back the information we need for us to make our decision. But until we've made the decision, it's an open item, right? It's workflowing, right? It's at a step, there's a next step, and then there's the final step, something like that. And so the dashboards allow us to have all of those little buckets of things to do, be very consistent, very segmented. And from the LMS perspective, that allows us to supervise, right? Because we had the thought that we needed to solve for that. We used QuickBase as the tool to be our process and procedure program around that thing. And now the dashboards allow us to supervise to that. So we're able to do that on whatever it is. I use it for equipment coordination, but the safety team uses it for a whole different thing. What trainings are expiring? What OSHA recordable incidents do we have out there that we still have to close the loop on from a regulatory perspective? And all those things are able to be done in a system like QuickBase. Now, we could call that short-term planning, call it long-term planning. Really, it's just about management of information, right? So all of those things allow us to sort of skin the cat the way we want to. And so for folks that are in the industry that are solving a different problem, it's a different cat they got to skin. QuickBase is going to help them do their version of LMS. What is the problem? What is the processes and procedures? And how can I supervise it? A tool like QuickBase allows for all of those things, as long as you have the vision and the desire to put it in place. So, a lot of times construction companies are maybe not the most apt to want to change, right? So, if you're going to solve some new thing and you're going to put a tool in a guy's hand that he hasn't used before, you have to have fortitude to drive that change out into your organization. QuickBase is just another extension of that. But the beauty of it is through mobile, through access through iPads, your desktops, whatever it is, the ability for the guy in the field to have impact on the data that helps them short-term, long-term, whatever term plan is exponentially better in a tool like QuickBase. That's not to say it's the best at everything in the world, right? I mean, there are plenty of softwares out there that do a lot of really great things. Very few of them have you with the tools to do it if you're not a programmer and if you are not just solving that one problem they do. They're an observations tool for safety incidents. There's a great tool for that. Super. Well, you could build it in QuickBase, and when you build it in QuickBase, it can also plug into your OSHA side of compliance, where the inspection software, not so much, right? So you have to be able to have the vision of what you want to do with QuickBase, and then quite frankly, you just got to jump in there and start building your sandcastle.
Rob, thanks for joining us and sharing all of this, man. This has been super helpful to just kind of hear how you guys are using QuickBase at Lithco. So guys, we're going to turn this over to our Q&A time. So if you have any questions for Rob, make sure that you put them in the chat. And it's Construction Brothers signing off. Thanks for joining us.